So we saw this one coming. We all knew scandal would be a brewing when Universal announced that they were moving forward with a live action version of How to Train Your Dragon, and people started screeching that they better cast a lily white Scandinavian actress to play Astrid Hofferson. Oh, they didn't. They cast Nico Parker instead. Now you might say, Alex, you go on and on about how representation matters in mass media. People deserve to see their true history portrayed with tenderness and care, thoughtfulness in casting. That all still stands, but when we start talking about art that is intentionally using reworked history, historical inaccuracies, myths as a jumping off point for a fantasy universe that is loosely based off of some historical event or place, the conversation changes. Let me add a bit of a definition of fantasy. Key element of fantasy fiction genre is magic. That's what's key. That's what's key to keep. Fantasy novels, fantasy as a story can be romantic, historical, action-packed, or all three, but the element of magic is what sets the genre apart. The element of magic is the point of the story. That's why fantasy includes fairy tales, myths, and legends. All of those things are open to reinterpretation. None of those things are bound by historical fact. This series is not Brave from Merida, Scotland. It's not Mulan. It's not even The Lion King. All those stories have fantasy elements, but what drives the story forward is the fact that it's a particular place in time and history where the ethnic history, culture, all of that is imbuing the story with meaning and texture. Those are fantasies intentionally grounded in a specific place and time. When Cressida Cowell wrote How to Train Your Dragon, the series, and then Universal turned it into 3 movies, and then it got turned into a ton of TV episodes, the point was not to ground the story and the entire universe in a specific ethnic tradition or historical event or place. They didn't want to work within that storytelling framework for any piece, any iteration of this tale. This is a good time to also point out that Vikings are not an ethnicity. It's an occupation that had a wide mixture of European people from Denmark, Norway, Sweden, countries that are now known as that. I will give you this. Were the Vikings historically white-looking Europeans? Were they white people? Yes. Would it be cool if a girl who had like a known Viking history took on this role? Oh yeah. But the story has never found its power in being about a historical specific ethnic group. This is a fantasy franchise that gave Vikings horned hats. That's not even accurate. They didn't wear horned hats. That hat was not attributed to the Vikings until the 19th century. The outfits depicted across the series, they're not even historically accurate. They're not based on one real group of people. How to Train Your Dragons is based off of a stereotypical idea of what Vikings were. The whole thing where they juxtapose Hiccup and his cleanliness and his politeness and manners as opposed to everyone else's crass, unhygienic warrior way, that's also not based in reality. Hiccup is considered a bad Viking not because he doesn't live up to the standard, the historical standard of Vikings, but because he doesn't live up to the stereotype of one. The Isle of Berk, where this story takes place, entirely fictional. It is loosely based off of an archipelago called the Inner Hebrides that's located in the west coast of Scotland. And because it's a coast, you could technically imagine that different kinds of people, especially in a fantasy world, may have arrived on those shores. We are even now realizing that there were Vikings that made it to parts of Russia. And we know in Scotland, there's not one unbroken chain of an ethnic group of Europeans, because when you look back at the ways that the last names have evolved over the centuries, you see all these differences. This is not a movie about a real life culture. This is about a fantasy group of Vikings who fight imaginary dragons until a kid says, like, hey, maybe we should work with the imaginary dragons. And then they decide to work with the imaginary dragons. And the dragons depicted are not even necessarily historically accurate versions of the myths of all dragons. There might be a few, maybe some of the artists threw in some things, but like this is not a historically, academically accurate portrait of a mythology that has now been mishandled. This also was not a white actress's one shot at being represented in a film. I hate to spoil it for you, but there have been many opportunities for white women to get roles on stage and on the big screen. I'm not saying it's easy to get cast as something, but for decades in Western media, roles were specifically reserved for white women. If it was a period piece, they cast white women. If it was about a princess, also white women. Casting in America was also specifically engineered to only show a specific kind of white family. You might not believe this, but it's true. In the Heights was not actually produced for a while because they didn't know how they were going to do it without white people. That is a true story. And it's the same thing with To All the Boys I Loved Before. The producers were pushing for her to be replaced by a white woman. Casting has not swung so far in the other direction that there is just a lack of white representation in media or film. Now let's talk about money. Companies, multinational media companies, have one thing in mind: making money and taking that money from as many demographics as possible. The Isle of Burke has now opened up for tourists in Orlando. You have global releases. You have streaming companies that operate in multiple countries. You have people wanting as many different people to engage with the film as possible. Do you think they are going to continue to only represent the actual minority of viewers? There are brown, black, mixed, Asian, Hispanic, all sorts of people in the much global conversation of media who might want to see a film that has one person that kind of looks like them. And these production companies know this and they want that money. When it comes to fantasy, anything goes, and production companies are going to take advantage of that. They will incorporate images and cast members that bring in the largest draw of people or are something different from what they spent millions of dollars on. Do you think this company is going to, for a non-profit reason, decide to throw out an entire multi-franchise, multi-TV show series because they think that this is something that's just good for the culture? No, because it tested well, because they knew they could make money. Or because they just decided to have fun, mix it up, play with it, and they really liked Nico's tape. Fantasy that is inspired by history is not bound to it. If you're not telling a cultural tale for a new audience, you have all this leeway without offending people. Nico Parker herself is of significant European ancestry, and yet she's the only one whose genetics are being perused and investigated. Her mother, Thandie Newton, has a parent from Zimbabwe and a parent from England. Nico's dad is white. The amount of people who have come on here to tell me that I am not black and that people like her are not black, that totally switches up when you are considered in something that's for white people. Should all the actors have taken DNA tests to see who's the most European, who has the most Viking blood to play a fantasy show? I think what's also really driving this is that he looks very much like the Hiccup character from the animated version of this. Obviously, Nico doesn't look like this. This is the animated version of Astrid Hofferson. The energy people have for representation is fine, but you need to apply it to something that actually matters and where it actually counts. Was Astrid changed? Yes. Does this qualify as erasure? No. We have to ask ourselves, why are we bothered that there are black and brown people in fantasy? Are we really going to debate multi-ethnic people's right to be in a fictional fantasy movie over a fake heritage and culture? But should we be surprised? Because whiteness in America has always had a fantastical element to it because it can magically morph into being whatever it needs to be for the sake of power. It has always changed according to the needs of white supremacy and is not based on any genetic science. But it's a little late to start playing hard and fast by these rules. It's also a little late to ask fantasy writers to change the rules of a genre so a few people can feel less triggered.